Have you ever seen a peaceful farmer take on a ruthless biker gang and turn everything upside down? In this story, our quiet hero faces off against menacing outlaws in what becomes the most epic standoff Willow Creek Valley has ever witnessed. Sparks fly, adrenaline surges, and entire communities are changed forever. If you thought a single person couldn't stand up to a dozen roaring motorcycles, prepare to be amazed. Our protagonist proves that courage and determination can transform not just one small farm, but the hearts and minds of even the toughest gang members. Curious about how a life or death fight could evolve into a chance for redemption? You won't believe the twists until you've heard them all. Make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss a single update. We share incredible stories like this one all the time. Stick around and see how it all ends. Mason Jake Harrington had long since tired of the world's noise. For years, the swirling chaos of foreign battlefields and secret special forces missions had been his life. When his wife Laura passed away 2 years earlier, something inside him snapped like a brittle tree limb in winter. He had come to Willow Creek Valley for solitude, hoping that the rich earth and gentle sun would heal the scars etched into his soul. The land itself was an oasis of rolling hills, fertile farmland, and a wide river that snaked lazily through rows of willow trees. At dawn each morning, a pale fog danced at the edges of the fields, drifting around the wooden fences and old tractors as if uncertain whether to stay or dissipate. It was precisely the kind of peaceful setting he needed. Jake purchased a spread of acreage that included a modest house and a few old barns he referred to as the Harrington homestead. The buildings weren't grand by any measure, just enough to store seeds, keep farming equipment running, and shelter the small produce stand he operated every weekend. He grew strawberries, heirloom tomatoes, collard greens, and rows of sweet corn that brushed the horizon like tiny soldiers standing at attention. Though he'd once been a man of intense precision and discipline, combat had changed his perspective. He no longer needed the rigors of morning drills or the bark of superiors. Instead, he found solace in testing soil pee, adjusting irrigation lines, and silently tending to plants that asked for nothing but care and water. Early each morning, Jake carried a weathered thermos of coffee into the fields, wearing clothes as nondescript as the battered pickup he used to haul produce into town. His only neighbor on that side of the valley was Beatrice Caldwell, an elderly woman who had been a friend of Jake's mother. She appeared at his gate weekly with baskets of warm bread or homemade preserves, insisting that if he didn't maintain proper nutrition and social connections, she would have no choice but to nag him until he complied. He accepted her visits graciously, appreciating the calm she brought with her. Beatrice was the closest thing Willow Creek Valley had to a community matriarch. If there was a fundraiser, a festival, or a rumor to be spread, she would be at its center. Despite the tranquility, Jake's old habits refused to die. The clang of metal or the snap of twig behind him still made him pivot unconsciously, eyes scanning for threats that no longer existed. The last thing he ever expected was that his haunted vigilance would prove useful again. For the first year, nothing disturbed the fields except wandering deer and the occasional neighborly car passing. But there were rumors swirling through the valley. A crew of bikers called the Crimson Jackals had begun extorting farms in neighboring counties. Jake heard the stories at the local feed store but shrugged them off. Willow Creek Valley had a strong sense of community. People here pulled together. He assumed, or perhaps simply hoped, no group would be reckless enough to target a small, tight-knit region where everybody knew everybody else. He was wrong. It happened on a brisk spring morning, just as the dew was beginning to evaporate from the grass. Jake was on his knees checking his irrigation lines when he heard the low rumble of motorcycle engines reverberating through the valley. The noise drew closer, echoed off the hills, and shook the wooden boards of his shed. Beatrice Caldwell had just arrived moments earlier, carrying her usual basket of muffins and thermoses. One for him and one for herself. She looked up nervously from where she stood by the fence. "I'm guessing those aren't friendly weekend riders," she remarked, voice laced with unease. Jake rose slowly, dusting the loose dirt from his jeans. His eyes settled on the approaching motorcycles. There were at least a dozen riders, all wearing matching black leather jackets, marked by a snarling jackal emblem on the back. Crimson Jackals, Jake realized instantly, though he'd never seen them in person. Rumors said they had a habit of shaking down farmers for protection money, And from the moment he laid eyes on these riders, he had no doubt the rumors were true. Beatrice looked at him, worry etched across her features. If I leave now, they'll see me driving off. They might come after me. Jake's gaze flickered to her car. It was old, and her reflexes not what they once were. He nodded in understanding. Stay inside the barn, he said quietly, and lock the door behind you. I'll handle them. He tried not to think about how quickly old instincts came roaring back. The tension in his shoulders felt so familiar, so profoundly rooted in the training he had tried to leave behind. He squared up near the edge of his plowed rows, arms hanging loosely at his sides, giving no hint of the coiled energy within him. The bikes formed a half circle around him in a display of intimidation, engines idling, riders glancing around hungrily. A hulking figure at the center removed his helmet, revealing a shaved head and a jagged scar across his cheek. "Name Striker Morgan," he drawled, scanning the barn, the fields, and then Jake. "Heard you've got some prime crops here, pal. Would be a shame if anything unfortunate happened." Stryker gestured with a black-gloved hand, and several of his goons kicked their bike stands, stepping off onto Jake's carefully planted rows. The vegetables that Laura had once helped him seed, a piece of her legacy he nurtured, were now crushed beneath their heavy boots. Despite the anger twisting inside his gut, Jake kept his face impassive. "State your business," he said calmly, ignoring the knot of tension in his stomach. One of the riders spat onto the dirt. "We don't want to waste time, old man. $5 grand a month, and we keep your place safe from accidents." Jake's eyes flicked to the destroyed plants. "Looks to me like you're causing accidents, not preventing them." His quiet retort earned a ripple of laughter, hollow and mocking. It was exactly what Stryker wanted, a display of power. But Jake recognized it for what it was, a bluff that relied on no one standing up to them. Unfortunately for the Crimson Jackals, Jake wasn't the sort to be easily cowed by a show of numbers and bravado. "Is that so?" Stryker's gaze darkened. He snapped his fingers, and a tall, wiry man with a tattoo snaking around his neck stepped forward. In one fluid motion, the man swung a metal chain at Jake, intending to crack it across his forearm or skull. Any normal farmer would have panicked or stumbled back. But Jake's reflexes, shaped by countless close-quarters confrontations on foreign soil, kicked in. He sidestepped, caught the chain with a single hand, and yanked the attacker off balance. A collective gasp went through the circle of bikers. The wire-thin man sprawled face-first into the dirt, chain clattering uselessly beside him. Before anyone else could react, Jake had already whipped around, seizing a second biker who lunged with a raised crowbar. With a twist of the wrist and a well-placed elbow, he disarmed the man and sent him tumbling into a patch of rose seedlings. The move was so swift, so fluid, that the rest of the bikers simply stared in shock. Stryker glowered, his fists tightening at his sides. "Lucky move, friend." Jake let out a slow breath. "I'm not your friend," he said evenly. "Take your men and go." That was the moment Stryker decided he had something to prove. With a sudden roar, he lunged at Jake, swinging a heavy punch. Jake pivoted neatly, deflecting the punch with his forearm. He followed with a knee strike to Stryker's midsection, causing the big man to wheeze. In the span of a few seconds, the fearsome leader of the Crimson Jackals lay on his back, glaring up at a quiet farmer who was breathing only slightly harder than usual. The other bikers exchanged uncertain glances, torn between loyalty to their leader and a very real intimidation from Jake's obvious combat prowess. Two of them tried to help Stryker up, but he batted their arms away, fuming. "This ain't over," he spat, wiping a trail of blood from his split lip. Jake remained still, an immovable pillar of calm. Adrenaline surged in his veins, but he kept his voice level. "If I see you in Willow Creek Valley again, it'll end worse." Snarling, Stryker and the others backed away to their bikes. Engines roared to life with ear-splitting thunder, and they peeled away in a haze of dust. Jake waited until the noise faded, until the taillights vanished around the bend, then exhaled. His fingers trembled slightly, a reaction to the burst of violence he'd tried for so long to avoid. Beatrice ventured out of the barn, basket of muffins still clutched tightly. Her eyes were wide with relief and concern. "I saw what happened." She took a shaky breath. Jake, you know they'll be back, right? Men like that don't let a defeat slide. They'll come in greater numbers, and they'll come looking for blood. Jake nodded, reaching down to pick up the chain left behind by the first attacker. I know. He paused, turning the heavy links over in his hands. But no one in Willow Creek Valley is going to pay them a dime. If Striker Morgan thinks he can bully us, he's going to learn otherwise. Word spread like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, visitors came trickling onto Jake's property, each with their own piece of the story. Harold Gibbons, who owned the feed store in town, arrived first. He was a tall, gruff man with a prematurely graying beard and a permanent limp from a tractor accident years ago. He hopped off his old pickup and winced when he saw the damaged row of vegetables. Jake, I heard it was the Crimson Jackals, Harold said in a low voice. They've been making rounds in the next county, too. Broke some poor fellow's arm when he said he couldn't pay. Jake nodded, leaning against a wooden post. He kept glancing at the road, half expecting to see dust clouds heralding another group of bikers. They came here, demanded $5,000 a month. Harold let out a slow whistle. $5,000? That's 3 times what they were asking other folks. Must have thought you were an easy mark. Jake shrugged, not wanting to discuss the fight in detail. He was never one to boast. They got the message, but Beatrice is right. They'll be back, and likely not alone. Before Harold could respond, they heard another car rattle onto the property. Dr. Evelyn Reyes, the local veterinarian and one of Laura's best friends, hurried over. She was breathing heavily, not from exertion, but from anxiety. I just heard about the attack, she said, eyes darting around. Are you okay? Anyone hurt? Jake managed a tight smile. Just my plants, he said. Could have been worse. Harold folded his arms. The question is, what do we do next? Let's be real. You might be a tough son of a gun, but you can't fight off an entire gang forever. If the rumors are true, they're bigger than we thought. It's not an agreement. And once word gets out that you beat them, they'll see you as a threat. They'll want to make an example of you to keep the rest of us in line. Jake took a slow breath, scanning his farmland. He remembered how Laura used to walk through these rows, carefully labeling each plant variety. He recalled how her laughter echoed among the barns during harvest time. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. If Stryker and his gang want to fight, I'll be ready. But I don't want an all-out war. We don't need more violence in Willow Creek Valley. Harold grunted. That's noble, Jake, but we might not get a choice. A cornered predator is more dangerous. The conversation was interrupted by the sight of a police cruiser kicking up dust as it approached. Sheriff Delgado stepped out, adjusting his belt. He was a stocky man with kind eyes, but there was an air of weariness around him. I got calls from half the county about the Crimson Jackals showing up here, he said. I also heard you single-handedly took them down. Care to explain? Jake locked eyes with him, deciding how much to reveal. They came, they threatened, I reacted. That's all there is to it. Sheriff Delgado sighed. I see. Well, we need to talk about what happens next. The rest of that day unraveled into a whirlwind of planning and speculation. Sheriff Delgado wanted to set up a rotating patrol schedule, but with only a handful of deputies covering a broad rural area, resources were thin. Deputy Cross, the youngest on the force, showed up with a digital camera, snapping pictures of footprints and tire tracks like a meticulous detective. She circled the property, taking note of the damage and questioning Jake about the specifics of the altercation. He answered her queries politely, but offered minimal detail. What you did, taking on a dozen bikers alone, doesn't exactly sound like pure luck, Delgado pointed out, arms folded as he watched Jake. Jake could almost hear the unspoken question. Who are you, really? Instead of a direct answer, Jake deflected with a statement that was both honest and evasive. I had training, Sheriff, and I did what was necessary to protect myself. The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. Look, Harrington, I'm not ungrateful for what you did. You might have sent a message to these Crimson Jackals that Willow Creek Valley won't be easy pickings. But if they come back, you won't always have the element of surprise. Jake regarded the man's wary expression. I understand, but I have no intention of letting them terrorize this community. That night, the town held an impromptu meeting at the local church hall. Reverend Cardona spoke first, quoting a scripture about standing up to darkness. Dozens of farmers, shop owners, and townspeople crowded the small room, voices overlapping in tense discussion. The flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of fresh coffee made the situation feel almost surreal, as if it were just another community bake sale. Except they were discussing how to protect themselves against a criminal gang. A wave of arguments broke out. Some suggested pooling money to hire private security or pay the Crimson Jackals off until they could develop a better plan. Others believed that fighting back would only escalate the violence. Harold, never one to mince words, stood up and declared, "If we roll over once, they'll never leave us alone. We gotta stand firm, like Jake did." Beatrice Caldwell was in the front row, knitting in her lap with a fierce concentration. Though normally mild-mannered, she spoke up firmly. "No one here wants bloodshed, but we also won't be bullied. My grandmother helped found Willow Creek Valley. I refuse to see it fall to intimidation." Jake watched from near the wall, arms crossed. He hadn't wanted this attention, but there it was. The people of Willow Creek needed a symbol, a person they could rally behind. Whether he liked it or not, he was now wearing that mantle. Sighing inwardly, he cleared his throat to speak. The room hushed, eyes shifting his way. "I appreciate the support," he said, voice low. "But we have to be careful. The Crimson Jackals aren't a bunch of bored teenagers. They're organized. They've beaten and burned their way through more than one county. If we stand together, we stand a chance. But we've got to be smart about it. Let the sheriff's department coordinate. Let's set up watchers for each major road. And if they do come back, we gather evidence to prosecute them." Silence followed, as if everyone was absorbing his words. Then slowly heads nodded. Despite the plans, an undercurrent of fear rippled through Willow Creek Valley. Families moved their livestock closer to home, locked their doors earlier in the evening, and kept loaded rifles propped by the bed at night. Business owners felt uneasy closing up shop after dark. Even the children picked up on the tension, whispering about bad guys on motorcycles as they rode their bikes in the schoolyard. Jake noticed subtle changes in himself as well. Long suppressed instincts woke fully, gaining ridgelines for vantage points, double-checking locked doors, maintaining a mental map of potential ambush spots near his property. He also made a few quiet upgrades to his homestead, a reinforced door on the barn, hidden cameras near the entrance, and motion sensor lights for the perimeter. He reasoned that it was better to be over-prepared than regretful. Meanwhile, Striker Morgan was not idle. The Crimson Jackals' main hideout lay in a dilapidated warehouse in the neighboring county, surrounded by chain-link fences and peppered with graffiti. On a Friday night, he convened his gang. The men who had tangled with Jake still wore bruises, cuts, or bandaged wrists. Striker paced before them, ignoring the ache in his own ribs, courtesy of the farmer's knee strike. "This Harrington character," Striker growled, "has made us look weak. The rest of the valley folks think they can stand up to us now. That stops tonight." He shot a glance at a lean man with sunken cheeks and restless eyes known as Viper, an enforcer rumored to have a short temper. "Viper, you take 5 men and go show them that no one humiliates the Crimson Jackals." An uneasy silence followed, as even the hardened bikers sensed the seriousness in Striker's voice. A direct assault on Willow Creek Valley risked confrontation with the law, but Striker's pride had been mortally wounded, and pride could be more dangerous than any weapon. The next evening, a small squad of bikers was seen circling Harold Gibbons' feed store at the edge of town. At first, they only revved their engines and glowered at Harold's employees. But shortly after sunset, one of them hurled a Molotov cocktail through the store's window, setting a display of fertilizer bags on fire. Flames burst into a sudden inferno. Fortunately, no one was inside, and an alert passerby called the fire department in time to save most of the building. Still, the damage was done. By the time the trucks arrived, the bikers were gone, leaving only the stench of burnt plastic and scorched wood. When word reached the rest of the valley, anger and fear collided like storm fronts. This was no longer a case of petty extortion. This was a declaration of war, and it was one the Crimson Jackals seemed more than eager to wage. Jake, hearing the news, felt a familiar chill in his bones. He knew the escalation had begun. 2 days after the fire at Harold's feed store, Sheriff Delgado called for a county-wide meeting, inviting state authorities to weigh in on the crisis. The gathering took place at the Willow Creek Community Center, a utilitarian building with cinder block walls and folding chairs that squeaked under anxious residents. Rows of men in uniform stood by, including a few state troopers who had come to show support. Delgado stepped up to the front, his stance reflecting the heaviness of the moment. "We have evidence connecting the Crimson Jackals to the arson at Givens' store, but we also have reason to believe they're planning further attacks. Our intelligence suggests they might be targeting multiple farms, as well as the local diner and even the church. We need to coordinate." The tension in the room was palpable. Reverend Cardona spoke next, the tremor in his voice betraying his concern. "We can't live like this, barricaded behind locked doors. Our faith teaches us to seek peace, but we must also protect the vulnerable." State Trooper Rosalind Brandt stepped up, adjusting her Kevlar vest. "If these bikers escalate, we'll respond. But manpower is limited, and this is a big area to cover. We'll do our best to have patrols on the highways, set up stings where we can. Meanwhile, I advise all of you to stay vigilant." Harold, leaning on his cane more heavily than usual, forced himself to stand. "Stay vigilant," he repeated, frustration evident in his tone. "That's easy to say, but are we supposed to sleep in shifts or sit by our windows with shotguns all night long? That kind of life will break people. There's got to be a way to end this once and for all." At this, Jake cleared his throat. He had been standing at the back trying to avoid the limelight. The crowd quieted as they turned to look at him. "Harold's right. Living in fear isn't living, but I also know that confronting a gang on their terms might lead to more violence and more casualties. There has to be a middle ground." Beatrice Caldwell rose from her chair, knitting needles clutched in her hands. "Jake's right. We need to show unity. If the Jackals see they can pick us off one by one, burn a store here, threaten a farmer there, they'll never stop. But if we stand together, we might just show them they can't terrorize Willow Creek Valley." "Fight or pay," someone muttered. "Those are our options, aren't they?" A heated debate broke out again, with arguments volleying back and forth. Jake tried to listen to each speaker, but his mind was already moving ahead, strategizing. In a moment of clarity, he recalled how his Special Forces team had worked with local villages overseas. The key was collaboration, a combination of self-defense, community building, and outreach. Could that approach work here? As the night stretched on, the voices in the community center ebbed and flowed, but no firm resolution was reached. Everyone agreed the threat was real and immediate, yet no one had a perfect solution on how to stop the Crimson Jackals without descending into a full-blown conflict. The days that followed brought a tense calm to Willow Creek Valley. People went about their chores, fed animals, plowed fields, and served customers while casting nervous glances at the roads. Patrol cars from the sheriff's department and the state troopers made their rounds, but the bikers were nowhere to be seen. It was like the valley held its breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. On a Saturday morning, Jake was tightening the bolts on a new security gate he had installed at the entrance to his property when he saw dust clouds on the road. This time, though, it was not the roar of motorcycles. It was a battered pickup truck, followed by a small convoy of minivans and sedans. Curiosity piqued, Jake set down his wrench and approached the vehicles. Out stepped a man with lean muscles and haunted eyes. He wore a leather vest that had the Crimson Jackals emblem partially ripped off, the edges frayed. There were about 10 others with him, each looking equally uncertain. The man raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Name's Talon Friedman," he said, voice low. We left the Crimson Jackals after that fiasco here. Didn't sign up to burn stores and shake down old farmers. Heard you were giving some of us a chance to do better?" Jake's brow knitted in surprise. "I'm not sure I understand. You came from that gang and now you wanted to join us? There's no militia here, just a community trying to protect itself." Talon looked down, fiddling with the thread on his half-torn patch. "I served in the Army a few years back. PTSD got real bad when I returned home. Crimson Jackals offered what felt like a brotherhood, but it changed. Strikers turning it into a violent, hateful thing. Some of us wanted out, and we have nowhere else to go." Jake hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the ragtag group. Most of them had hardened faces, tattoos, and the weary stance of people ready to fight or flee. He saw the same brokenness in their eyes he once saw in his own reflection after leaving Special Forces. "If you think this is some paramilitary outfit, you're mistaken," Jake said. "We don't have an army. We've got farmland and a sense of community. That's it." A few behind Talon shrugged, looking almost relieved. One woman, arms covered in faded military tattoos, stepped forward. "I'm Regina, Navy vet. I can't go back to the Jackals, and I'm tired of looking over my shoulder." Before Jake could answer, Beatrice appeared, seemingly out of thin air with a covered dish. "Now, I don't trust easily," she said, eyeing the newcomers, "but I don't believe in kicking lost folks to the curb either. If you come here with peaceful intentions, we'll talk." The group seemed stunned by her calm hospitality. Jake could see they were exhausted, hungry, and not fully sure of their next move. A mental calculation clicked in his head. If these people truly wanted a chance at redemption, it might weaken Stryker's power. If they were spies, well, he'd just have to keep a close watch. News of Talon Friedman and his group's arrival traveled faster than a summer prairie fire. Within hours, Sheriff Delgado and Deputy Cross showed up at the Harrington homestead, stepping out of their cruiser with cautious expressions. They found Jake sitting at a long wooden table beneath a large oak tree, with Talon and the others lined up in mismatched chairs. Some were sipping coffee, others picking at slices of homemade bread that Beatrice had served. Delgado approached warily. "I hear we've got ex-Crimson Jackals seeking refuge. That's a complicated situation, Jake." Jake nodded. "They claim they want out of that life. Some of them are vets, carrying scars we can't see. I'm thinking about letting them help around the farm. Maybe keep them busy with honest work. Might be better than them drifting around with nowhere to go." Deputy Cross glanced at Talon. "We've run your record. Some petty crimes, nothing too major. But you have associations with a known criminal group. Why should we trust you?" Talon's face hardened, then softened again. "I can't prove anything with words alone. Give me a chance to prove it with actions. That's all I've got left." The tension was palpable. Finally, Delgado sighed, taking off his hat and rubbing his forehead. "Jake, I know your heart's in the right place. But do you have any idea what it means to shelter ex-gang members? If even one of them is feeding information back to Stryker, you'll all be targets." Jake met the sheriff's gaze. "We're already targets. If there's a chance to bring some of them over to our side to reduce the Jackals' numbers and maybe show them a different path, I say it's worth it." Beatrice folded her arms. "I'll keep an eye on them. They mess around in the slightest, and they'll answer to me." She rapped her wooden spoon against the table as if it were a judge's gavel. An unexpected chuckle rippled among the group, easing the tension. The sheriff looked from Jake to Beatrice, then to the ragtag defectors. "All righty, Harrington, but any trouble and I'll have to haul them in. I can't let Willow Creek Valley become a haven for criminals." Jake nodded in agreement. "Understood, Sheriff. Let's just take it one day at a time." With that, Talon Friedman and his small crew became unofficial farmhands under Jake's supervision. Over the next week, they mended fences, helped Harold Gibbons rebuild a damaged stall at the feed store, and even volunteered at Reverend Cardona's church to set up cots for a local homeless outreach. Their sincerity surprised the community. While some locals remained suspicious, others were swayed by the sight of tough-looking individuals quietly repairing barns and mowing church lawns. Still, the shadow of Stryker Morgan loomed. Every day that passed without an attack felt like a borrowed reprieve, and everyone wondered when the other shoe would drop. Summer heat settled over Willow Creek Valley, bringing with it long days of relentless sun. Plants wilted if not watered properly, and people grew restless in the haze. The Crimson Jackals still lurked somewhere, but weeks had gone by without a direct confrontation. Rumor had it that Stryker was gathering forces, calling in favors from affiliated gangs in other parts of the state. Jake busied himself at the homestead, working side by side with Talon and his defectors. Even though he supervised every move, he couldn't help noticing the dedication they put into the tasks. Regina, the Navy vet, planted row after row of peppers, tomatoes, and cucumbers, muttering about how the repetitive work helped keep her nightmares at bay. A tall man who went by the name Spectre, with shaved hair and a cautious demeanor, turned out to be a whiz at fixing old tractors. On a hot afternoon, Jake took a break beneath a shade tree with Talon. They sipped iced tea Beatrice had dropped off earlier. Talon's gaze drifted to the fields of green, scanning the horizon as if checking for threats. Used to do that in Afghanistan, he admitted, always scanning for danger. Jake studied him. Army, right? Talon nodded. 8 years, 2 tours, came home and, well, it was rough. Ended up riding with the Jackals because it felt like belonging. Didn't realize it had morphed into this. Jake let the silence stretch. He understood too well. He remembered the sense of camaraderie that had both sustained and haunted him during his own Special Forces service. What changed for you? He finally asked. Talon exhaled slowly. The day Stryker told us to rough up a farm that looked like it couldn't pay. We ended up hurting a father and his teenage son who tried to protect their livestock. Something clicked in my head. I thought, this is exactly the kind of violence I fought against. I wanted out, but Stryker said if I tried to leave, I'd be a target too. So I stuck around out of fear until we got humiliated on your farm. Then I realized maybe there was a different path. Jake nodded. Redemption is a choice. Hard one, but a choice, son. Before Talon could respond, Deputy Cross's cruiser rattled onto the driveway in a cloud of dust. She stepped out, a grim look on her face. Jake, you'd better come with me. The Crimson Jackals have been spotted at the old mill road. Stryker's with them. Talon's jaw tensed. How many? Cross's lips thinned. At least 30. They set up a blockade. Something's coming, and it's bigger than burning a feed store. Jake felt an old, familiar tension coil in his stomach. He exchanged a glance with Talon. In that look, both men understood that the next hours might define the fate of Willow Creek Valley and themselves. The sun was sinking low when Jake and Talon arrived at the makeshift command post Sheriff Delgado had set up near the old mill road. It was a dusty intersection where 2 dirt tracks crossed, flanked by tall, dried-out grass and an abandoned grain silo. Several patrol cars and 2 state trooper vehicles were stationed here, lights flashing in the deepening twilight. From a distance, one could see the silhouettes of motorcycles lined up on the opposite ridge, men in leather vests gathered around them like wolves circling prey. Delgado, face drawn, greeted Jake and Talon with a curt nod. We've tried negotiating. They're demanding we hand over the traitors, their word for Talon and the others. They also want Jake Harrington, specifically. Jake raised an eyebrow. Me? Deputy Cross, who stood beside Delgado, swallowed hard. Stryker apparently wants revenge. They say if we don't comply by nightfall, they'll roll into Willow Creek Valley and burn everything they see. A bitter laugh escaped Talon. He won't stop there. He'll try to wipe out anyone who helped us defect. The tension was so thick it nearly distorted the air. A handful of local farmers had parked their trucks in a protective line. Jake recognized Harold Givens among them, armed with a hunting rifle. Reverend Cardona was there too, leading a small circle in quiet prayer, even as he glanced nervously at the formidable bikes gathered in the distance. Jake took a deep breath, recalling his years of specialized training. He had led missions in far more dangerous conditions, but this felt strangely more personal. They want me? Fine. I'll go talk to Stryker. Delgado's eyes widened. Are you nuts? They'll kill you on sight. Jake shook his head. Maybe. Or maybe they'll listen. Stryker's men might think I'm just some hotshot who got lucky, but if I can convince them that you're not pushovers, we could avoid a bloodbath. Harold overheard and hopped down from his truck bed. I'll come with you, he offered, limping a little. I've faced them before, and if we stand together, it'll send a message. Talon and Regina from the defectors also stepped forward. Count us in, Talon said. We might still have sway with some of them, not with Stryker, but maybe the others. Within minutes, a small delegation was formed, crossing the dusty road toward the ridge where the Crimson Jackals waited. The wind carried the faint scent of gasoline and motor oil, as if it too foretold the possibility of fires being lit tonight. Stryker appeared at the front of his crowd, arms folded over a broad chest scarred from years of fights. The look in his eyes was pure animosity. In the fading light, Jake locked eyes with Stryker and spoke with a voice that echoed across the clearing. You and I have unfinished business. Let's settle it without innocent blood. A grim smile crept across Stryker's face. Harrington, the tough farmer who gave us that humiliating night. I've been waiting for this. And so began the showdown that would determine the future of Willow Creek Valley, suspended in the charged air between two lines of determined people, one side clinging to violence, the other to hope. A hush fell over the field where Willow Creek Valley met the ridge. Mason Jake Harrington stood with a small contingent of allies, Talon Friedman among them, facing the Crimson Jackals under Stryker Morgan's command. In the dimming glow of sunset, the two lines of people presented a stark contrast. On one side, a hardened gang set on revenge. On the other, a congregation of townsfolk, reformed bikers, farmers, and local law enforcement who had gathered to protect what they cherished most, their home. Stryker took a step forward, heavy boots kicking dust into the warm evening air. The nasty gash along his cheek from the previous brawl had healed into a thin, puckered scar. A twisted smile formed at the corners of his mouth. "We could solve this nice and easy, Harrington," he said, voice carrying just enough for both groups to hear. "You hand over my traitors and turn yourself in for a little retribution, and we ride away. Nobody else gets hurt. No more buildings burn." Jake squared his shoulders. He had wrestled with the moral weight of possibly unleashing more violence, but he had come to a conclusion. Capitulating to a bully solved nothing. "Stryker, your own men are sick of the bloodshed. They left you because you've lost your purpose. All you have left is fear. But let me tell you something." He paused, glancing at the group of ex-jackals who stood quietly beside him. "Willow Creek Valley stands together. You want to come after me? Fine. But if you do, this valley will rise against you." A low rumble of discontent rippled through the Crimson Jackals' ranks. Some looked uneasy, eyes flicking from Stryker to the determined faces across the clearing. Others rolled their shoulders, gripping crowbars, chains, or the guns tucked in their waistbands. Stryker's gaze tightened on Talon Friedman. "There's no place in my world for betrayers," he spat. "You all had your shot to make real money, to seize power, and you turned it down for what? Planting corn and playing nursemaid to cows?" Talon stepped forward, ignoring how his heart pounded. "We were done hurting innocent people to line your pockets," he said. "I'd rather mend fences here than break bones for you." From behind them, Sheriff Delgado's voice rang out, amplified by a small megaphone. "Stryker Morgan, you and your men are surrounded by law enforcement. Stand down or we will place you under arrest. Your crimes have stacked up. Arson, assault, extortion. This is the time to walk away." Stryker responded with a harsh laugh. "I see only a few deputies and some farmers with pitchforks and duck guns." He gestured grandly with an arm. "We're 70 strong right here. If we ride into your valley, there's no telling how much damage we'll cause." Harold Gibbons, leaning on his cane, raised his rifle. "We don't want bloodshed, but we won't hide from it either," he said firmly. "Don't you dare underestimate this place." Jake glanced up at the first hints of starlight peeking through the bruised purple sky. He recognized the expression on many of those biker faces, men hardened by desperation and false bravado. But as dangerous as that desperation could be, he also saw a chance. Not all jackals wore the same rage Stryker did. Some eyes held doubt, uncertainty, even a spark of regret. Moments stretched, taut, as if balancing on a razor's edge. Everyone expected the confrontation to erupt into violence, especially when Stryker's second in command, a tall man with slicked back hair and a square jaw known as Hound, flicked open a switchblade and let the dim light glint off the steel. The tension coiled, ready to snap. Jake inhaled slowly, letting the crisp night air fill his lungs. "Stryker, this doesn't have to go the way you think," he called out, taking a single step forward. A murmur of protest came from the valley's side. Harold and Talon both hissed for him to hold back, but Jake ignored them. "You've been crossing county lines, burning feed stores and terrorizing small farms. What's your endgame? More territory? More fear?" His gaze shifted to the ring of jackals. "Some of you standing there have served in the military, or have families at home. Why do you keep following Stryker down a path of destruction?" Muttering rippled through the gang. Not all of them were hardened criminals with nothing to lose. Jake could see it in the way a few heads turned away, shamed or unsure. But Stryker lifted his chin, eyes blazing. We follow the strong. That's how it works. You either dominate or get dominated. You humiliated me back on your farm, Harrington. I intend to repay the favor on a grand scale. At that, he grabbed a shotgun from one of his lieutenants and leveled it at Jake. A gasp rose from the onlookers. But Jake stood fast, even as adrenaline lit every nerve. If he dodged or dove for cover, it might spark the violence they all dreaded. Instead, he spoke calmly. You can shoot me, Stryker, but think about what happens next. My friends, this community, and now law enforcement from 3 different counties won't stop until every single one of you is locked up. This ends in blood or jail time for you. Is that what you want? A flicker in Stryker's eyes suggested a moment of hesitation, but he kept the shotgun trained on Jake. Hound and another jackal shuffled forward, restless. Sheriff Delgado and his deputies tensed, hands hovering near their service weapons. For an agonizing heartbeat, the night held its breath. Suddenly, a shrill whistle pierced the tension. Everyone turned to see none other than Beatrice Caldwell, stepping past the patrol cars, brandishing her wooden spoon as though it were a royal scepter. Her voice rang out, surprising in its clarity. Stryker Morgan, you point that weapon at another man and threaten to tear this valley apart. I assure you, you'll be dealing with me. It was absurd, an elderly woman shaking a spoon at a shotgun-toting biker, but the sheer unexpectedness made even Stryker hesitate. Snorts of laughter broke from a few in both crowds, the tension twisting into something else. For a moment, Stryker lowered the barrel half an inch, confusion etched on his scarred features. No one had ever threatened him quite like this. Jake seized the moment. It's not too late to walk away, he repeated. Take your men and go. If you want to fight, we'll defend ourselves. But I'm telling you, it'll be the worst mistake of your life. The stirring of a breeze, cool against the fading heat of the day, swept dust across the gathering. The hush seemed almost supernatural, one woman with a wooden spoon standing off to one side, a line of deputies with firearms at the ready, and a gang balanced on the edge of violence. Stryker's knuckles whitened on the shotgun's grip. The muzzle twitched upward as if he might truly pull the trigger. But before he made his decision, a distant chorus of engines drew everyone's attention. More motorcycles were approaching from behind the line of patrol cars, but these newcomers did not bear the Crimson Jackals emblem. Jake felt a surge of concern, bracing for yet another hostile group. Instead, he saw patches that had been partially torn or re-sewn, former jackals from other counties, accompanied by local farmers and even a handful of brand new faces. Talon Friedman recognized them first. Those are some of the ones who defected, he breathed. They must have heard about tonight. Leading the newcomers was Regina, Navy vet and determined ex-jackal, who had stayed at Jake's farm to guard the homestead. She pulled up in a dusty sedan rather than a motorcycle, stepping out with half a dozen others who wore the expressions of people seeking hope rather than conquest. They arranged themselves in a loose semicircle behind the deputies, effectively hemming the Crimson Jackals in from 2 directions. A broad-shouldered man with thick tattoos up his arms, known as Rhino, hollered at Stryker from his spot among the defectors. We're done, Stryker. Done with your brand of intimidation and cruelty. Join us or get out of the way. The Crimson Jackals seemed unsettled by this multiplication of enemies and allies. Now faced with a larger, even more resolute force, some of the bikers started shifting their weight, exchanging looks. 1 or 2 took quiet steps back, as though reconsidering their loyalty. Stryker's eyes darted among the new arrivals. He spat into the dirt. Traitors, all of you. You'd rather help a bunch of farmers? A voice rose from the cluster of ex-jackals who just arrived, a voice trembling with anger and sorrow. Farmers treated us better in 1 week than you ever did in a year, the speaker said. They gave us a chance to make amends. The temperature of the standoff changed. No longer was it just Jake on one side and Stryker on the other. It was about an entire community, ex-bikers looking for redemption, townsfolk standing together, law enforcement standing firm, and an elderly woman still glaring with a spoon raised. Stryker seemed to recognize the shift. Even with a loaded shotgun in his hands, he was outnumbered and Worse yet, outmaneuvered morally. He took a step back, lips curling in frustration. Yet the night had one more twist to offer. From the far side of the fields, the growl of multiple engines announced yet another presence. The Death Brokers, a rival gang that had long circled the Crimson Jackals. They had been waiting, perhaps, to exploit the chaos for their own gain. Headlights flared against the darkness, revealing new threats on the periphery. It was as if the entire underworld had descended on Willow Creek Valley, each faction smelling opportunity in the tension. The Death Brokers spread out along the opposite ridge, their leader, known only as Magnus, stepping off his bike with the slow, deliberate confidence of a man who believed he held the advantage. The reflective strips on his jacket caught the last rays of dying sunlight, giving him an almost spectral glow. Jake's heart sank. He recognized the name. The Death Brokers were notorious for swooping in where gang wars weakened one side, ready to conquer both. Sheriff Delgado and Deputy Cross exchanged worried glances, while some of the newly arrived ex-Jackals murmured curses under their breath. Magnus's voice boomed across the field. "Striker Morgan, we've been hearing rumors you're losing your edge, that your own men are defecting. Looks like the scuttlebutt was true." He cast an appraising glance at the cluster of reformed bikers and townspeople. "Now you're pinned between farmers and cops on one side and me on the other. Not a smart position to be in, is it?" Stryker, shotgun still in hand, whirled to face this new threat, shoulders tightening. "Back off, Magnus," he warned. "This is my fight." Magnus chuckled, a low rumble like distant thunder. "Now see, that's where you're wrong. You made so much noise with your extortion and arson that the Death Brokers couldn't resist. We came to pick up the pieces." His eyes swung to Jake. "And you must be the infamous farmer who humiliated the Crimson Jackals." Jake said nothing, only held his ground. Beside him, Talon Friedman whispered, "Magnus is just as bad as Stryker, maybe worse. If he sees an opening, he'll take it." Suddenly, the flash of headlights came from the main road again, this time a larger convoy of state police vehicles. Reinforcements had arrived, lights swirling in the gathering darkness. Sheriff Delgado exhaled with relief. "At least we're not alone," he murmured. The Death Brokers stiffened at the sight of more official presence, but Magnus kept his composure. "It's a party now," he mocked. "Cops, farmers, ex-Jackals, actual Jackals, and me." He pointed a finger at Jake. "If you folks think you can handle two gangs at once, be my guest." Harsh laughter echoed among some of his men, but it was forced. They too realized how unpredictable this standoff was becoming. The state troopers formed a tight line, weapons at the ready, as their commanding officers shouted instructions to stand down or face immediate arrest. All at once, it felt like the valley was on the brink of all-out chaos. Jake's mind raced. He needed to defuse this powder keg, or people would die. He could see that Sheriff Delgado was coordinating with the troopers, trying to establish a perimeter. But with so many armed gang members in close proximity, a single flinch could light the fuse. Stryker, cornered by foes on both sides, still burned with hatred. His attention darted from the Death Brokers to Jake. If he couldn't subdue the valley with intimidation, would he decide to shoot his way out? That possibility made the muscles in Jake's neck tighten. He glanced at Beatrice, who had stepped to the side, her lips pressed in a silent prayer. In the tense half-light, Jake felt the eyes of Willow Creek Valley on him, as if they expected him to conjure some miracle. He remembered the old days in Special Forces, how one of his commanding officers had said, "When everything's about to blow up, that's when a true leader keeps the calm." He inhaled, filling his lungs, and decided to bet on redemption a second time. Bet that these men, hardened though they were, might still choose a path other than bloodshed. With careful, measured steps, Jake walked forward, placing himself nearly at the midpoint between the Crimson Jackals and the Death Brokers. It was a spot where bullets from either side could converge. Murmurs rippled among both gangs. Sheriff Delgado hissed through his megaphone, telling Jake to get back. But Jake raised an open hand, signaling not to shoot. "I'm Mason Harrington," he said in a voice that carried in the stillness. "I served for 2 decades in Special Forces, did tours in some of the worst places on Earth. I've seen civil wars, tribal conflicts, insurgencies, Let me tell you something. Violence doesn't end with a single gunshot. It stirs up more violence, more revenge, until we drown in it. That's how entire nations fall apart. He turned to face the death brokers, addressing Magnus. You see a chance here to seize territory, but you're also looking at an entire community that won't bow to thugs. The cops have you surrounded. Even if you overpower a few of us, you'll lose in the long run. Prisons are filled with men who tried to win with brute force. Then Jake pivoted to Stryker. As for you, you've already lost half your gang. They defected because they realized your path leads to a dead end. You told me I humiliated you. But if you pull that trigger, you're signing your own demise, because this valley will never let you walk out of here victorious. Stryker's jaw clenched, but his eyes faltered. Jake pressed on. Look around you. Even your men who stay loyal are frightened of how far you'll go. Meanwhile, you have men like Talon Friedman and Regina, people who wore your patch but decided to protect farmland and help neighbors instead of shedding blood. Why do you think that is? It's because what you offer them now, Stryker, is an endless cycle of pain, and they want out. Something shifted in the air. Among the Crimson Jackals, a handful of bikers started looking at each other, as if re-evaluating the situation. Hound, the second in command, made no move to lower his switchblade, but he looked less certain. Magnus, on the other hand, sneered. What a touching speech, he mocked, resting a hand on the gun at his hip. You think a few nice words will change the nature of predators like us? Jake's stomach tightened. He knew not everyone would be swayed by reason. Still, the difference between a battle and a surrender could hinge on a single unpredictable moment. Without warning, someone from the death broker's side fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed across the fields, and the entire standoff erupted into chaos. Many in the Crimson Jackals spun around, guns drawn. State troopers ducked and shouted for the crowd to disperse. Stryker shouted something about not backing down, while Magnus yelled for his men to hold fire. But the single gunshot had broken the fragile calm, and panic was in motion. Beatrice Caldwell let out a startled cry, dropping her spoon as she dove behind a patrol car. Jake's heart lurched. He could see a cluster of farmers, unarmed, pressed close to each other near the trucks. Sheriff Delgado's voice blared through the megaphone. "Cease fire! Cease!" But a second shot rang out, this time from Stryker's direction. Now the entire field seemed to tilt toward violence. Bikers took cover behind their motorcycles, some returning fire at the unseen shooter who had let off the initial round. Jake tried to shout instructions to the crowd on the valley side, telling them to get down, to move behind the vehicles. But the noise overwhelmed everything. Talon Friedman and Regina crouched beside an old tractor that had been left at the roadside. "We can't let this turn into a bloodbath," Talon hissed, checking to see if any of his former brothers were firing at him. Jake's instincts kicked into overdrive. Find cover, identify the shooters, limit casualties. But this wasn't a battlefield with trained soldiers. It was a mix of townspeople, ex-gang members, criminals, and law enforcement in a swirling melee. One of the Crimson Jackals, looking barely more than 18 years old, shook with terror as he fumbled a pistol. Jake saw him raise the weapon toward a farmer who was scrambling for cover. Without thinking, Jake sprinted across open ground. In an instant, he was on the young jackal, forcing the pistol skyward. A shot fired harmlessly into the air. The youth's eyes went wide as Jake disarmed him with the same practiced efficiency that had once made him lethal in special forces. "Stay down," Jake yelled, dragging the kid behind a parked car to keep him safe from stray bullets. Across the field, Stryker crouched behind his own bike, roaring commands at his men. A few scattered jackals seemed unsure whether to obey. Hound was nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, Magnus's death brokers were exchanging gunfire with someone at the far edge. It was impossible to discern a single front line. The confrontation had fragmented into clusters of confusion. Sheriff Delgado and the deputies managed to hold their position near the center, calling out for calm, but the crack of gunfire drowned them out. In the midst of this, the biggest fear was that innocent people would be caught by stray bullets. Jake's mind raced. If he could rally enough reformed bikers and townspeople to push for a ceasefire, maybe they could stop the shooting before it spiraled completely out of control. Amid the swirling dust and flashes of muzzle fire, Jake spotted a group of ex-jackals, led by Regina, trying to wave down the state troopers. She yelled over the chaos, "We can help. Let us form a perimeter to keep the civilians safe." A trooper glanced at her in bewilderment, uncertain whether to trust these bikers turned peacekeepers. But another trooper, higher in rank, signaled for them to go ahead. Quickly, Regina and a dozen others fanned out like they had practiced during training drills back at Jake's farm. They guided families and other unarmed residents away from the line of fire, moving them behind a hillock that offered decent shelter. The ex-Jackals posted themselves as guards, scanning for threats. It was surreal. Men and women who once might have terrorized towns now acting as protectors. But it was working. Fewer panicked civilians ran underfoot. Jake, still crouched with the disarmed young jackal, saw a flash of movement. Talon Friedman racing across the field with Hound in pursuit, the latter wielding a raised switchblade. Jake's pulse quickened. If Hound caught Talon, there'd be bloodshed for sure. Rising to his feet, Jake made a split-second decision to intercept. He crossed the open ground in a few powerful strides. Hound had almost reached Talon when Jake came in from the side, hooking an arm around Hound's wrist. The blade glinted in the faint moonlight, but Jake twisted sharply, forcing Hound to drop it with a pained yowl. Hound staggered back, clutching his wrist, eyes wild with hatred. Talon's chest heaved as he steadied himself. "Thanks," he gasped. But Hound snarled, spit flying. "Stryker will kill you all for this betrayal. You think you can just flip sides?" Talon clenched his jaw. "It's not betrayal if it's the right thing to do." He knocked Hound's blade farther away with his foot. As they subdued Hound, a new round of gunfire erupted near the ridge where Magnus and some of his men had retreated. Jake realized that a chunk of the Death Brokers was now engaging the state troopers. The swirling lights of patrol cars created an almost nightmarish strobe effect, revealing fleeting images of muzzle flashes, raised arms, and scattered shouts. He needed to find Stryker. If the gang leader could be disarmed or taken into custody, the Crimson Jackals might collapse in morale. Jake gestured for Talon to come with him. "We have to stop Stryker before any more people get hurt." The two men crept behind a line of abandoned vehicles, scanning for the Jackal leader. They found him kneeling behind a black motorcycle, fiddling with his shotgun. His face was streaked with sweat and dust. Next to him lay an unconscious Jackal, possibly wounded by stray fire. "Stryker!" Jake hollered over the chaos, trying to get his attention. "This is senseless!" Stryker snapped his head up, eyes practically glowing with rage. "I told you this would happen, Harrington. Everything was fine before you turned my men soft." He raised the shotgun, finger twitching near the trigger. Jake prepared to dive aside, but Talon lunged first. In a tangle of limbs, he collided with Stryker, wrestling for control of the shotgun. The two men crashed onto the dirt, thrashing as the weapon fired a deafening blast into the night sky. The shotgun's blast tore through the stagnant air like a thunderclap, momentarily drowning out every other sound. Sparks flew where the spray of pellets ricocheted off the asphalt. Both Talon and Stryker cried out, though neither appeared to be directly hit. Jake dashed forward, heart pounding in his throat. He stomped down on the shotgun's barrel, pushing it into the dirt to keep it from firing again. Stryker let out a roar of frustration, swinging a wild punch that grazed Jake's ribs. Talon grunted, trying to pin Stryker's arm, but the man was fueled by desperation and adrenaline. Twisting fiercely, Stryker managed to throw Talon off to the side. Jake clenched his teeth, pressing his knee into Stryker's shoulder to subdue him. A chorus of grunts and curses exploded around them. Suddenly, a new surge of gunshots rattled from the Death Broker's position. Jake heard the ping of bullets striking metal behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw that the troopers were closing in, forcing Magnus and his men to pull back. The Death Brokers were outnumbered and had begun to realize it. This unexpected retreat shifted the dynamic once again. Stryker, pinned under Jake, still struggled, spitting furious threats. "You think you've won, Harrington? You have no idea who I've got connections with. The Crimson Jackals are bigger than any single valley." Jake pressed down firmly. "Bigger than Willow Creek Valley, maybe, but not bigger than the spirit of people who won't live in fear. That's what you don't understand." At that moment, a figure emerged from the swirling haze of dust in frantic movement. Sheriff Delgado, flanked by two deputies. They had their weapons drawn, clearly aiming at Stryker, but Jake waved a quick sign that he had it under control. Delgado nodded, holstering his gun, and motioned for the deputies to cuff Stryker. "Stryker Morgan," Delgado declared, "you're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, extortion, and a laundry list of other charges." He directed one deputy to read Stryker his rights. The battered gang leader glared defiantly, but his arms were yanked behind his back and locked into handcuffs. Talon staggered to his feet, wincing, but offered Jake a nod of relief. Meanwhile, the rest of the Crimson Jackals, seeing their leader taken down, began to lose their stomach for the fight. Some dropped their weapons and surrendered to the troopers. Others tried to flee on motorcycles, but state police vehicles and newly arrived reinforcements had blocked most escape routes. Small pockets of gunfire continued for another minute or two, but the tension was collapsing rapidly. Across the field, the Death Broker's retreat became a rout. Magnus barked at his men to regroup, but with the troopers pressing in, they scattered. A handful were apprehended on the spot. Others vanished into the darkness, engines roaring in the distance. The night sky echoed with sirens and frantic shouting, but the worst seemed over. Jake let out a long, shaky breath. The standoff that had threatened to plunge Willow Creek Valley into chaos was coming to an end. Talon sank to one knee, pressing a hand to his side. Jake knelt beside him. "Are you okay?" Talon managed a wry grin. "Yeah, I just got tossed around by Stryker. I'm alive, though. That's something." The aftermath at dawn looked like the remnants of a storm. Patrol cars and ambulances dotted the makeshift battlefield. Gunshot holes pockmarked a few vehicles, and spent shell casings gleamed in the early light. Medics moved between the wounded, some wearing patched leather vests, others in police uniforms, all stripped of the bravado that had defined the night before. Jake watched as Stryker Morgan, hands cuffed behind him, was loaded into a squad car. Despite his furious protests, his reign of terror in Willow Creek Valley had ended. Across the way, a group of ex-Jackals helped the medics tend to a few injured troopers. Among them, Regina crouched next to a man who had taken a bullet in the calf, applying pressure to stanch the bleeding. Her grim resolve spoke volumes about how far she had come from her previous life. Sheriff Delgado hobbled over, jacket stained with dirt, an exhausted look in his eyes. "We've got at least a dozen arrests," he reported wearily. "Stryker and several of his top men will be facing a laundry list of charges. The Death Brokers lost a few guys too, and some got away, but we've got enough intel from the ones we captured to keep them looking over their shoulders." Jake nodded, glancing across the field where Beatrice Caldwell stood with her arm around a trembling farmer who'd nearly been caught in the crossfire. The old woman's spoon was missing, but her presence radiated comfort. "What about the valley, Sheriff? Think we'll see more trouble?" Delgado sighed. "Hard to say. Gangs like the Death Brokers sometimes regroup, but we made it clear they won't find easy pickings here. And the Crimson Jackals," he shook his head, "with Stryker gone, I suspect they'll scatter or follow the exodus we're already seeing, where those who want to reform find their way to you." A wave of fatigue crashed over Jake. He was no stranger to violence, but each conflict carried a unique toll. He caught sight of Talon Friedman leaning against an ambulance while a paramedic checked him over. With a nod, Jake walked over. "How's it look?" Talon shrugged. "Bruised ribs, maybe a sprain, but I'll live." "Thanks for jumping Stryker back there," Jake said. "Could have ended a lot worse." Talon cracked a tired grin. "Guess I'm hooked on saving things these days. Better than destroying them." An official from the state troopers approached, collecting statements. Jake repeated his account of the night's events, carefully omitting any unnecessary details about his Special Forces background. The less sensationalism around him, the better. The trooper nodded, scribbling notes. When the chaos finally settled, Pastor Montgomery Cardona arrived with volunteers from the church, handing out water bottles, blankets, and coffee. Harold Gibbons, still nursing his cane, directed some of the younger folks to gather up scattered debris. More than once, Jake overheard voices whispering words like, "miracle," and "never thought we'd see the day." Indeed, it was miraculous in many ways that a shootout involving multiple gangs and law enforcement ended with relatively few casualties. In the days following the battle, Willow Creek Valley wore its scars like badges of both trauma and triumph. Bullet holes in road signs were patched, burnt patches of grass reseeded, and vehicles towed. Local newspapers ran headlines proclaiming, "Farmers' Resolve saves Valley and gangs routed by united community." Jake skimmed these stories with a mix of relief and discomfort. He had never sought the limelight, yet found himself lauded as a folk hero. Stryker Morgan sat in the county jail, awaiting trial on a slew of charges, including attempted murder and organized crime offenses. His high-profile arrest triggered a cascade of legal consequences for the Crimson Jackals across multiple counties. Meanwhile, many mid-level members were offered plea deals if they testified against Stryker and agreed to enter a rehabilitation program. The novelty of this arrangement caught the attention of both local authorities and the media. After all, it was not every day that a rural farming community ran a makeshift rehab plan for ex-bikers. Faced with these circumstances, Sheriff Delgado and Deputy Cross brought Jake a proposal. Formalize the arrangement he had with Talon Friedman's crew. "We've got at least 20 or 30 more jackals who say they want out," Deputy Cross explained in Jake's kitchen, while Beatrice served fresh cookies. "A few have families, others are veterans struggling with PTSD. We don't have the funds or the manpower to manage a standard rehabilitation center, but your farm has become a symbol. They're asking if they can come learn a new trade, maybe get therapy through the VT." Jake ran a hand through his hair, glancing at Beatrice and Talon, both of whom listened quietly. Talon scratched at the scar on his knuckles. "Honestly, Jake, it helped me to have daily chores, a steady routine, gave me something good to focus on." Beatrice chimed in. "Community is crucial. It's one thing to lock people up. It's another to help them change." Her warm eyes flicked to Talon. "We've already seen how some folks can turn things around if given the chance." But Jake felt the magnitude of such a responsibility weighing on him. "I'm no therapist," he said, shaking his head. "I can offer farm work, a place to stay for a few. But the numbers they're talking about, that could be overwhelming." Sheriff Delgado exchanged a look with Deputy Cross. "We'd help with logistics, funding, background checks, coordination with the VA," Delgado offered. "It won't be just you. The county sees this as a unique opportunity. The state troopers are on board too. They've seen enough bloodshed. If there's a way to steer these men and women off the criminal path for good, that's worth trying." Jake exhaled slowly. Memories of the swirling firefight still haunted his sleep. He had come to Willow Creek Valley to escape the violence of his military years, yet now he was being asked to wade back into a different kind of conflict. One fought not with bullets, but with compassion and discipline. A soft nudge on his arm made him look up. Beatrice smiled kindly. "It's in your nature to protect and guide, Jake. Maybe this is the reason you ended up here." Looking around at the worn kitchen table, the half-empty plate of cookies, and Talon Friedman sitting so comfortably in the Harrington homestead, Jake felt a stirring in his chest. "All right," he said at last. "Let's see what we can do." Within a few weeks, Harrington Farm Rehabilitation began as an informal pilot program. The first arrivals were mostly Crimson Jackals who had defected during the showdown or shortly after Stryker's arrest. Some arrived sullen and guarded, others wide-eyed and desperate for a second chance. The structure was simple. They worked the fields each morning under Jake's supervision, and in the afternoons, they attended counseling sessions either at the farm or at the local community center. Dr. Evelyn Reyes, the veterinarian who had been close friends with Jake's late wife Laura, even helped out by connecting them with mental health professionals who specialized in PTSD and addiction issues. Meanwhile, Beatrice Caldwell took on the role of unofficial farm mom. She made sure everyone ate proper meals and occasionally surprised the group with baked treats when they hit milestones like finishing a row of crops or completing their first therapy appointment. A few of the ex-jackals were initially suspicious of her kindness, but her gentle persistence broke down barriers. Talon Friedman rose to a leadership role among them. Having already spent months on Jake's farm, he acted as a mentor, teaching newcomers everything from how to drive a tractor to how to mend fences properly. Jake noticed that the same fierce loyalty that once bound Talon to the Crimson Jackals now bound him to the farm's mission. "I used to jump at Stryker's orders," Talon confessed one evening, "but it's different here. I'm not doing it out of fear or misplaced loyalty. I'm doing it because I want to help these guys see there's a life beyond gang colors." The arrangement caught the eye of local media. News vans occasionally showed up, hoping to capture footage of bikers turned farmers. Jake, ever reluctant about public attention, tried to keep them at a distance, insisting that the participants needed privacy to heal. Still, a few stories slipped through, highlighting how a quiet community in Willow Creek Valley was turning criminals into productive citizens. One crisp morning, as frost glimmered on the edges of the fields, Jake found Talon standing by a row of newly planted saplings. Talon had his head bowed, gaze focused on the tiny buds. "Looks like they're taking root," he said softly, running a finger along a leaf. "Hard to believe these spindly things will be tall trees someday." Jake joined him, breathing in the cool air. "They just need the right conditions, enough water, some sunshine, and time." Talon nodded thoughtfully. "Kind of like us, huh?" Before Jake could respond, they heard the rumble of an approaching motorcycle. Regina pulled up, removing her helmet. She had been assigned to help a different local farm for the morning. "We've got news," she said. "Another group of ex-jackals is coming from 2 counties over. The sheriff wants to know if we can handle more people." Jake exchanged a glance with Talon, then gazed at the wide acres around them. The land that once stood as a solitary refuge for him was becoming a refuge for many. "We'll find a way," Jake said quietly. And he meant it, even if the scope of this mission was bigger than anything he had planned. Reflecting on everything that happened, I can't help but feel gratitude. Through every brawl, betrayal, and hard-won lesson, this story reminds us that no one is beyond hope. A quiet farm became the epicenter of transformation, giving a second chance to those who once thrived on fear. Even in the darkest hours, unity proved stronger than any rivalry. Watching tough, battle-scarred bikers turn into compassionate protectors is proof that redemption isn't just a dream, it's a choice we make every day. As I look back on this tale, I'm inspired by how a single act of courage can ignite a community, bridging gaps we once believed unbridgeable. Thank you for tuning in, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Let's discuss what moved you, or any lessons you'd take away from this journey. Your perspectives keep these stories alive, so join the conversation.